Hello, I'm Jackie Fox, and since my walkout video got a content strike on YouTube, I'm going to be making this series available early on all other platforms. But also, this is a thing that I'm going to start to do from now on. So if you want to be able to get to my content as soon as possible, I'm going to be releasing first editions through my other platforms, so go ahead and give them a subscribe. In my first video in this series, I covered Season 1 of Servant of the People, and how that led to President Zelenksyy. But I didn't talk a lot about reality. Instead, I talked about the artifice of the show and the illusions that seemingly misled many voters. For this video, I'm going to be leaning a lot harder on my Ukrainian contacts, specifically a Reddit user named Morfolk, but I'm going to be doing my best to get sources and verify what he's saying. I'm largely at the mercy of Reddit, Wikipedia, and Google Translate to get the story, and there's a lot of research even on my end. So now's a great time to start supporting this channel on Patreon, because each supporter brings me closer to doing stuff like this as a day job. The first thing we need to understand this is context. A lot of context. Starting with just over 5 years ago. Back then,
the Ukrainian people have just overthrown corrupt mafia regime in power propped up by Russia. The remnants flee with billions of stolen money. Ukrainian gold reserves are almost empty. Russia invades Crimea and eastern Ukraine, which were providing 20 to 30% of GDP. The risk of default climbs dramatically. Poroshenko wins the presidency and stabilizes the country. 60% of the parliament members are new, mostly patriotic and Western-oriented people who start an unprecedented number of reforms. The show was used as a political tool to discredit unprecedented success of the government team at the time and to give power back to the oligarchs. Ukraine is waking up to the reality slowly. According to the latest polls, only 37.5% of Ukrainians believe we are going in the right direction, compared to 60+% after the presidential elections. It's been approximately half a year, and the new president and his team has had several corruption scandals already.
Before we can get into the scandals, though, we need more context going back even further. Ukrainians notoriously hate politicians. They had the lowest approval rating of any government in the world, despite that government defending against an invasion, overseeing 4 years of GDP growth, achieving visa-free travel arrangements with the EU, sanctions against Russia, but I'll let Morfolk explain the two main reasons for it.
1. For the last 900 years, Ukrainian lands were ruled by the neighboring empires who stole resources and abused locals. So on a deep cultural level, Ukrainians are led to believe that ruler equals evil. 2. We've just gained independence 27 years ago, and do not have enough political tradition to understand what to expect from each branch of the government, how checks and balances work, and how citizens should monitor and control their representatives. There's no such thing as call your congressman here.
This led to a situation where only one president has thus far managed to get a second term, and even then only by the skin of his teeth, while everyone else usually ends their first term in the single digits. No party managed to have a majority in parliament twice, and most can't even survive their first terms.
Becoming a president is an almost guaranteed political suicide in Ukraine.
Things changed in 2013 with a movement called Euromaidan that encompassed several movements which unfolded over a long period of time. Other than protests larger than the region had seen in nearly a decade, one of the first big moments came when the Prime Minister was jailed for starting a hunger strike against the president. It wasn't long before protesters were attacked by special police armed with stun grenades, tear gas, riot gear, and this was hardly an end to things. Instead, this moment was crucial in adding fuel to the fire that would burn into the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution. The events that followed this police escalation were riots that led to record press injuries, at least since the move to independence in 1991. This was followed by more violence as protesters occupied buildings, blockaded government headquarters, and toppled a statue of Lenin vowing,
Yanukovych, you'll be next.
December was full of violent conflict with the police and meetings between Ukraine's president, Yanukovych, and Putin. The two men came to a cooperative deal, and this only poured gas on an already burning fire, as Russian resentment was quite high within Euromaidan, where protesters largely sided with the EU. During this and the following month, activists were shot by the police under suspicious circumstances. A group is also charged as terrorists for I'm just going to read you the quote because this is completely nuts. The Patriots of Ukraine group members were given 6-year sentences for trying to blow up a non-existent Vladimir Lenin statue. A local city council had already dismantled the Lenin monument before the alleged plot was discovered. That being said, they're a neo-Nazi group, so I'm not exactly sad about it, but still, getting charged for terrorism by plotting to blow up something that doesn't really exist? Are you kidding me? January also saw Ukraine pass anti-protest laws and saw the people banding together to protest these so-called dictatorship laws. At this point, I've already glossed over so much, but for the sake of time, let's just say things got worse, and more blood was shed into February when the real revolution began. Protesters calling for the Constitution to be rolled back to its pre-2004 state, and this battle was the one over which the revolution was fought. On the 20th, it was officially decreed that the police could use live rounds on protesters, not that they hadn't already in the past weeks and months. It was only days later that the president was impeached and replaced, leading to the end of the revolution and Euromaidan. But Ukraine would never quite be the same. Later in the year, Russia would annex Crimea and invade parts of Ukraine as well. And this was all in the years leading up to the show that I mentioned in our first video. So, yeah. Anyways, after Euromaidan, a law was passed that forbid people who were involved with the massive corruption of the pro-Russian mafia regime, the conspiracy against Ukraine, and the orders to shoot protesters from ever holding government positions again.
After investigations and court rulings, the final list of such people was much shorter than expected. But there were some high-profile cases as well as some middle management. One of these middle managers was a lawyer that worked for several oligarchs, including Kolomoyskyi lately. The lawyer was active in organizing Zelensky's campaign, and when asked about his future plans and his ban, he said he had no intention to work for the government. Upon winning, Zelensky immediately made himself the head of presidential administration, roughly White House Chief of Staff. When questioned by the journalists, the lawyer said he was unfairly accused and banned, so he doesn't think the law should apply to him. Another Zelensky advisor said that technically, head of presidential administration doesn't work for the government, but rather for the president, so the law doesn't apply, and they want to challenge it in the Supreme Court anyway. In the meantime, the guy should stay, and Zelensky himself said that if he found out that the lawyer broke any law, he would fire the guy. But for now, Zelensky wasn't aware of such cases. The guy is still working.
We seem to be getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's go back to 2017. Servant of the People changed in 2017 with the second season. It was the year when investigations against the oligarch Kolomoyskyi, which I'm probably mispronouncing, started. The very man who owns the channel 1+1 where the show is broadcast. He lost his bank, which was at the time Ukraine's largest, and had to flee from Ukraine. The show shifted from escapist fantasies into the realm of propaganda. This also explains the shift of tone on a few topics from Season 1 to Season 2. For example, in Season 1, the IMF and EU moneylenders are framed as wanting to help Ukraine, whereas the corrupt Prime Minister creates the problem by insisting that they take loans that they can't pay off and passing the buck to the next administration. But this tone changes a lot after the IMF and EU begin to push for financial and banking reforms. Suddenly, instead of sucking up to foreign lenders, Vasya's position is changed to, go fuck yourself, we are not beggars and we don't need your money. But there was another reason for the shift to propagandist motives, and that was the upcoming election. The show, lead actor, and the founding oligarchs had an unlikely plan that no one would see coming. So the framing that politicians had never done anything for the people, even by 2017, only increased. And during this era, the whole tone of the news on 1+1 would change.
Every little misstep of the parliament and president is overblown. Successes are either not covered or mentioned in passing. The scandals include stories like Poroshenko multiplying his wealth 90 times during his presidency. In reality, lost 40% of net worth according to Forbes. Stole money from the army to build himself a villa, donated money to the army, according to the officer serving at the time, etc.
If any of that seems overblown, Google it. I dare you. The theme of ignoring the increasing death toll caused by the ongoing conflict with Russia continues into these later seasons. Even as former President Poroshenko continues to show his support for the anti-Russian protesters in the streets. This is the beginning of how the show increasingly diverges from the legacy it most seems to be based on. Let's look at the themes which were carried through Season 2 and how they conflict with reality.
Our biggest threat was external. In the show version, it was internal. International community helped Ukraine. In the show, international community abused Ukraine. Oligarchs were losing power, influence, and money. In the show, oligarchs were as strong as ever. Soldiers were sacrificing their life to defend our land. In the show, army is just part of the same corrupt establishment. Parliament was implementing reforms. In the show, Parliament was preventing reforms. Experienced experts were able to get results in politics. In the show, only someone from the common folk could get results. It created this fake image of Ukraine and then made people mad about the fake or overblown problems. Unfortunately, it worked.
The issue was that the narrative of the show became more compelling than reality for the viewers of the show. And even as Euromaidan had propelled Poroshenko into power and things had finally begun to get better, the narrative of the show and the 1+1 channel as a whole had the people convinced of the opposite. This led to the formation of the Servant of the People Party in 2018, and only a few months later, their candidate for president, Volodymyr Zelenksyy, would win and take power in 2019 as the third season hit the airwaves. The TV president and the actual president were now the same person. It became the party's mouthpiece, because how couldn't it be? As the show did seasons where an actor playing president slaughtered parliament in cold blood, the same man, as candidate Zelenksyy, filed a police report against the makers of a meme in which he's hit by a truck. Regardless of whether or not you think this should be okay, you have to see there's a clear conflict of principles here. This all makes the drumbeat that leads to the vote in late 2018. Now, quoting Wikipedia on their reasoning to break the programming schedule,
after months of ambiguous responses, during the Quartal 95 New Year's Eve evening show on the TV channel 1+1, he announced his candidacy for the election. In so doing, he upstaged the New Year's Eve address of President Petro Poroshenko on that particular channel. Zelensky later denied that upstaging the president was intentional and attributed this to a technical glitch.
For context, this is less than 4 months before the election.
2019 presidential elections had no violations other than occasional typos in voters' names or addresses, and was the most quiet transfer of power in 27 years of Ukraine's independence, as previous ones included massive protests, fleeing president, numerous illegal violent activities, etc.
There's also another uncommon occurrence in this election, a fond farewell of the former president. For the first time, there was a spontaneous rally in support of the president who is leaving office, as many said, "Thanks, Petro."
Я вам дякую. Дякую тим, хто прийшов зараз сюди на вулицю Банкову, бо українці по-різному.
But at this point, I'm over my script limit for a second video, so I'm going to have to cut this story short yet again and continue this in a third and hopefully final video. So stay tuned. Because that means a lot to me, and my video just went out behind me.
Fox Talks.
By the way, editing me, if you see me raise the glass, it means I'm cutting for a quote.